Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome back to this conference. This is our second panel. I'm Shada Islam. I'm based here in Brussels. I'm a commentator on EU affairs, and I've been watching EU relations with the Western Balkans for several years now. I'm really delighted to be moderating this wonderful panel. Now, in the first panel, we heard about the connectivity issue. We talked about how connectivity is essential, pivotal to the region and to the region's economic recovery. Now, in this panel, we'll be talking about the economic winners and losers from the pandemic in the Western Balkans. We'll be looking at the bigger picture. What are the sectors, what are the countries, what are the regions that have been impacted the most by COVID-19? We know that there's been a fall in demand. The pandemic has played havoc with economies across the world, but here we'll be focusing on what's happening in Southeast Europe, here in the Western Balkans. So what are we going to be doing in the coming years, in the months and weeks ahead to get the recovery, a sustained and green recovery? What about investments into this region? What about remittances? What about tourism? What is the picture looking like, and how are we going to ensure that this wonderful region, the resilience of this region, can be ensured and can be mobilized to ensure this recovery, this very important recovery? To explore this issue with me further during this panel for about 75 minutes or so are Michele Geraci. He's the former Undersecretary of State for International Trade, Ministry of Economic Development in the Italian government. Joining us, I believe, Michele, from Shanghai. When did you get there? How did you fly there?
We have ways to get here, but it was an interesting trip.
Interesting trip. We'll talk about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice to see you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you. My old friend, if I may call you that, Majlinda Bregu, Secretary General of the Regional Cooperation Council. We've often talked together in public and in private when I was working at Friends of Europe. It's lovely to see you. You're actually in Tirana, which is wonderful.
I'm in Tirana, Shada, and I'm looking forward to visit you in Brussels. And congrats as well on your new position.
My new career, actually.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. And really grateful. So we have Nenad Jojovic, I think I pronounced it well, Senior Advisor to Marco Čadež, who is Chairman of Western Balkans Investment Chamber and a very well-known personality across the region and the world. And you're joining us from Belgrade.
Yes, right. Hello to everyone.
Right. So as I said, you know, there's been a lot of talk of disruption, of the economic devastation. Of course, the health sectors have been impacted, but beyond that, it's really our societies, our economies. So Professor Geraci, I'm going to start off with you. The rules of the game are very simple. I'm not going to allow you to talk for too long, but for about 5 minutes at the beginning, give me your assessment of what you think is happening in the region and whether you see, where you see the sectors emerging from this, let's say, stagnation or recession even.
Thank you very much. The way I see it, I go straight to the point, hopefully less than 5 minutes. The way I do the analysis is divide some of the sectors that are mostly domestic oriented versus the ones that are mostly international, export and supply chain driven. So there is at a macro level, like you suggest, there could be something like maybe agriculture, some of the digital sectors that could be, relatively speaking, least affected because maybe production and demand could be all within the country, each of the 6 countries, or within the region. When we move on to, however, manufacturing, that's where we have the big number drops. And I tell you, the situation here on the manufacturing, the integration with the global value chain is really something very similar, you know, of course, with the due proportion to what I've seen in my own country, an export-led economy, and we find us in the middle of trying to mitigate this effect by pushing exports more, which makes the country even more dependent on the global value chain. And so we cure, in a way, I'm telling you also this, if I may, as also not a recommendation or advice, but like a forward-looking. It's nice to say, oh, we need to do something to fix this industry that will be particularly hit in the Balkan areas. And how do we fix it? By trying to push more of the export. But that really, let's be careful, solves the short-term problem. It cures the small short-term, but not the root and the cause of the problem. And now you mentioned I'm in Shanghai now, and this is for me a way in looking into the future, how a country has, in a way, gone over the problem with the virus and now growing at 3%, just because they, little known, maybe to many observers, they have completely reduced the economic dependence on export. One other last point, and then I stop and we open up, is that I know, and I've been honored to be part also of the Berlin process on a couple of occasions, and we know that there is, of course, a process of joining the European Union. However, I warn that it's nice to be able to travel, someone was saying it before, from Tirana to another place with no borders, and it's all what we want to do, and indeed open market and free market do bring great advantages. But, and you're in Brussels, Shada, tell me if I'm wrong, I've seen during this coronavirus, this recovery, the intentions are good, but the speed of implementation is slower than the system needs. And so my advice to our friends in the area is do look at the process of integration with the European Union as a way that can rescue maybe the economies in the short term. Maybe we have also imbalances within those. So maybe we have a minus 6-7% in Bosnia and Herzegovina, minus 9% in Serbia for manufacturing. So there could be little differences. Europe can be a buffer, but I would think twice about relying entirely on the EU when it comes to be part of it as the savior, because unfortunately this crisis, and here I talk more of a technical expert than as a politician, will happen at a higher frequency. We have tensions, we have a disruption in some sectors. Of course, tourism is going to be, I didn't mention it, it was an obvious one, unfortunately. And we need the flexibility to react. And sometimes size is good. Sometimes size stifles the speed of reaction. I stop here for the time being. Thank you.
Yes, Michele, a wonderful start and some good advice already. I would say cautionary warnings about what not to do. So don't just rely on exports, though the temptation obviously is there to pump up that engine, right? Mm-hmm. And as you said, of course, membership of the EU is important, but that will not be a miracle cure. So basically, it's the region and whether you think, so maybe just for you to think about it, whether you think the idea of reshoring supply chains, which is growing popular here in Brussels and elsewhere, whether you think that provides an opportunity for Southeast Europe and to join that and benefit from that sort of regionalization, if you like. So let me move on to Majlinda. So from your point of view, the same question really for you. And then, of course, the role of the Regional Cooperation Council in ensuring that there is little disruption, or at least easing us into the recovery. How do you see it, Majlinda?
Shada, I'll just try now to give the latest and the perspective of this reality that we are living in. And I think that the main risk that the Western Balkans is going to face because of this pandemic, that it's not coming to an end, so it's a prolonged one, will not only be the recession in the region, which is projected now and forecasted from -3 to -5.7%. But as well, it will be a bit, let's say the situation will be a bit more difficult because of the deeper recession in the European Union. And considering that for the Western Balkans, the main trading partners, and the main trading partner is European Union, then the situation will become a bit more problematic. Actually, the FDIs have declined, and both in terms of domestic and foreign demand, the region is not doing well at this moment. But apart from the deficit, I think that whenever, even for us, it was quite easy to discuss and talk in terms of economic recession. But the biggest problem in the region will be the social problems that we have to afford as well in the coming months, and that as well have started to be present. So you mentioned tourism as one of the areas based on which the main economies of the Western Balkans are standing, let's say, tall, if I could use that term. And tourism is one of the sectors that is hit most. So international tourist arrivals decreased by 56% in the first months of the year, while the numbers in May went down by 98%. And if I could say that 1 in 5 trips that were booked and organized for during 2020 for the region has been canceled, then you can imagine that the situation, the unemployment, and the crisis that this sector and the retail one is facing in the Western Balkans is quite high. As I mentioned, the biggest problem so far that will be kind of a bit, let's say, increased even more will be the situation of unemployment. The unemployment was considered even before pandemic as being the biggest problem for the Western Balkans. Let alone now, while the 60% of all the business operators or managers have reduced their operations due to this COVID outbreak. So that's where the region stands today. Again, is this situation, the macroeconomic situation in the region will affect a lot of the levels of poverty or welfare, as well as in the level of education, which is a big problem because even of the interruption of schooling. Then I think that the data that will have to come by the end of the year will present to us the real figures of the sufferings during 2020. But what can we do? If you'll allow me to say it.
I was just going to ask you, yes, what do you see as the path forward? What can we do?
Because the situation usually it's usually not an easy one in the region, as you know. I do think and I do agree that closer relations in this process of European integration, and when I speak of European integration now, I would really like to put the emphasis on the real economic integration among Western Balkan countries per se, plus with the EU countries, because the regional economic integration in Western Balkans is not a self-standing process, but is an instrumental vehicle to increase the convergence with the EU single market principles. And these can help Western Balkans to participate in the EU value chains, to make small and medium enterprises a bit more international, to upskill the technology that is in use, or peoples as well. So I think that these are of utmost importance now for the Western Balkans. You know that at the beginning of the pandemic, and you heard it from the commissioner, it was said earlier today, and from the transport community, this story of green lanes popped up. And I think that was a very good exercise in times of pandemic. So we managed to keep a green lane in the Western Balkans. We managed to ensure the flow of goods and medicines in the Western Balkans. But most of the border crossing points of Western Balkans, 18 are with EU member states, and only 14 among ourselves. So we need now to get the story roll in keeping these border crossing points with EU member states open. That would be vital for the region, at least up to the moment when this pandemic will continue. But then it's going to be again important in order to ensure this economic integration vis-a-vis to the European integration as well. And I'll stop here because maybe we'll have the chance to talk a bit further, so I'm not going to use all the arguments now.
No, absolutely. And I need to say to everyone watching us, please think about the questions you'll be putting to our fabulous panelists, because there's a lot of very interesting and I have to say thought-provoking ideas that have already come out. And so please do send in your questions, and Ardian will be looking at them and sending them on to me. So Nenad, Majlinda, just to say, I think you've made some excellent points about how this is something that affects the region, and I can read between the lines because this is your passion, as is mine. Regional integration, economic convergence is very necessary in the region. So we have to work with the EU, and of course the message is clear, the warning is clear, keep those borders open, because we saw what a messy start it was when the pandemic came. National economic nationalism won the day, unfortunately, but we're working on it, and it's getting better, of course. So very strong points made already about how we need to work together. Nenad, if I could turn to you and ask you also for your overall assessment before we go into more depth and detail, please.
Well, I mean, just not to quote the numbers again that Majlinda rightfully mentioned, basically we live through the really process of basically uncertainty and interruption of the economic models that we saw not only in the Western Balkans, but also in the world, especially this interruption of basically just-on-time supply chain. And just bearing in mind that many of our production companies in manufacturing are part of the value chains of the bigger companies, mainly situated in the European Union and working for the European Union markets. And once the such interruption that occurred with the crisis, with the various problems, from a practical one to how to deliver the product to the very end, which we try to find a solution to the green lanes that Majlinda mentioned about, which didn't happen, of course, immediately, but it was like to a course of time. But I can say that it was pretty fast, to a basically shrinking demand of the products that you are part of the supply chain of. Then uncertainty of the long run contracts that our companies are under, and how to say, many contracts were put kind of on hold for the kind of say better times, to see when the markets and the demand will regain, which for the small and medium-sized enterprises that are especially in apparel and textile industry was a big problem, because they don't have much of the reserve and much of the autonomy to, how to say, survive through this period of time. And they relied on either the policies of the state and of the national banks, who were postponing the credit lines, like giving the moratorium on paying the loans, the credits, or they were relying on different kind of fiscal stimulus, like receiving payment for the workers and so on and so forth. However, on the other side, this type of disruption caused one thing that we realized, some of us knew it before, that basically there is a necessity in stronger cooperation and stronger cooperation mechanisms within our region, let's say, but also between the region and the EU and other parts of the world, but especially EU as in institutional terms. So to see the ways how to reconnect all this activity, how to provide fresh money to support this very, very problematic period. And then our economy suffered differently. While some economies, like you can say that, I would say nobody is a winner, just referring back to our main kind of say title. They are short-term winners, which of course are all these industries that didn't need any kind of human touch, I would say. And this is like the ICT industry who provided services. And we saw boost in these areas, especially in Serbia. also in food production, and of course the production of pharmaceuticals and all medicaments. And the companies who were enough flexible and could adapt and change their production from certain type of goods to something which was useful during the pandemic, like medical gear, protection masks. They also saw positive development that was of course boosted by the general demand. But the whole general model that we were relying to be part of these production chains, European Union saw this model just in time suffering with the Far East, with China facing for the first time that the essential goods in medicine and in pharmaceutical side are produced thousands of kilometers from the end user, and let alone now that the same applies to also our economies and our companies. Basically, that was the main driver of our economy, to specialize in certain areas, to advertise skillful workforce in certain areas, to do work on dual education in order to be specialized again in certain areas. I think that in the future we have to see of a bit more flexible models and to see how to rely on our own demand within the region and investment within the region, because we do have companies that are having a certain amount of capital that could be also reinvested, but due to the various reasons of macroeconomic instability, maybe political uncertainties, they are wary to do so. And then the biggest bulk of our development model is based on FDIs that in these times are again uncertain because of all the disruption on the world markets. So definitely it was very challenging. I mean, companies are coping, we're coping, and we are facing really various problems depending from industry to industry. Yeah. Service industry lies on tourism, suffered most, and that's like Montenegro and Albania were hit a lot. Again, small and medium companies who are part of this value chains that couldn't afford, having extra capital to survive also were hit most. And the companies who are for the manufacturing sector, who are part of the bigger value chains were hit, but not as big as others, right, because they could manage to have also certain reserves to overcome this period.
Thank you very much, and so also some very important points made there about shrinking demand, and I think a very good point about contracts and how you need to make them perhaps more stronger in terms of not just being able to, cancel them. I think this has been a problem across the world. In fact, deliveries have taken place or could not take place, and the problems of small and medium-sized enterprises, the need to be adaptable, flexible, and the problem and the uncertainty about foreign direct investment.
I would add one thing. I think that this crisis showed that the let's say organizations or network of organizations that are on the ground, that are know what are the needs, demonstrated really its the best utility in working with the government institutions or with international institutions to push for their efficiency, because we know sometimes how bureaucracy can have their own logic.
Yeah. And
in those days, you couldn't follow these logics because the solution need to be found within some 48 hours or a couple of days. And we know with Majlinda how really within a week we all mobilized all our advocacy, skills to really work with the governments, with the customs, with everyone in the region to enable goods to be able to circulate, and then to work also with the European Union for their border crossings to meet our demands, because the systems in many occasions are much different. The problem of the workforce, and that's something which we couldn't solve. How to send a skillful worker to another country to assemble, a machine that is imported from your country. And that
within the region, you mean? Within the region?
within the region, but also between the region and the EU as well.
And the EU as well.
Companies
Yes.
like from Holland that were like having contracts with companies in the region, but who needed to send workforce for Serbia, for instance, or from Bosnia to assemble these these units, and they couldn't travel.
Ah, yes.
It was really a big problem. And also within the region, among the countries, that there was no excuses, as you know. So yeah, I think we should be prepared much better for this type of hopefully not to repeat situations in the future.
Yeah, we'll come to the question of how we prepare for what's going to be, as I think Melinda said, it's a long-term issue with us. A second wave, and then who knows how we're going to be dealing with these things. So I think our economies, our societies, as Melinda pointed out, also have to become more adapted and prepare for what uncertain times generally. Michele, let me come back to you on the question of reshoring and supply chains being disrupted, whether that is an opportunity for Southeast Europe. And my second question for all of you will be about FDIs, because we are all of you have mentioned that that's a global problem also. So how can the Western Balkans, what is the specific attractiveness of the Western Balkans that we can still mobilize and deploy to attract foreign investors? And we know that the Chinese are investing. We know the European Union, Italy, your country is investing in this region as well. And we know that the Americans have just signed, or on the verge of signing. It's the International Development Finance Corporation is also putting money in the region. So it's not as though it's such a bleak landscape, but let's explore a bit further. So Michele, screen is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And I just follow up with what Nena was saying. I think the choice on the offshoring or reshoring and the, let's say, entry into the EU needs to be done according to two paths. Either allowing, as it was suggested, the movement of people, workers, or keep the workers where they are in the home countries and get the products to move to the European Union. Two different strategies while we complete the accession process, of course. My view is that given we don't have to like it, but it is what it is, the very high unemployment rate in Europe, in other manufacturing countries like Italy and Germany, less so. I think politically it's easier to accept trade of goods rather than movement of workers. We know, we don't have to lie that this is always a politically charged issue from each of the 27 times two parties, 54 different views on each topic. So, but the imports of goods that could be supplied to the value chain onto the EU countries, so basically be grandfathered by some EU industry that do need those machinery that may be produced in the region. That would be politically very easy to digest and economically very desirable. That's, for example, one problem that we have is not that we cannot export more, is that we have cut our imports from some of the producers like China, Vietnam, and this has affected our industry more than the lack of exports. So I think the positioning of reshoring could be done by doing the production of certain components of manufacturing that feed into the value chain of EU countries that do need them. The second thing is, again, I say this not from a political point of view, so forgive me. Be careful with the exchange rates, because the competitiveness, relative competitiveness of a country is done on two layers. Labor costs, so salaries, and currency. Let's make it simple. And I suppose the goal to develop the economy is to make people richer, and so salaries would over time be less and less competitive. Now, we don't have to play with currencies like Italy and other countries used to do in the 70s to do competitive devaluation. But before giving it up entirely, just the threat of having a currency in itself allows a better negotiation for the things that you were talking about, Nanette, so allowing the entry into the market of either people or goods. So, and don't forget that the reshoring is therefore just as it will last for as long as the markets are competitive. And we know that China is investing a lot in Africa. We have 420 billion US dollar of Chinese investment into Africa. Exactly in many of these sectors, we have the Belt and Road Initiative in Central Asia, we have Vietnam, Indonesia, and so on. So it is going to be very, very hard to compete on manufacturing because we will not, and I say we, each of our countries in Europe with no distinction, we will never have the scale that China has. And in manufacturing, scale dominates average production cost, and therefore it's going to be very, very hard to compete on cost once we have a little scale. And that's why I look east, not just into Europe, but I would look also on the other side and partner with the big players, so grandfathered by companies that operate in a big market. And of course, I say this because I'm here in China, but in 1 year that I was away, I have already seen differences in certain sectors. The speed of changes here is something that we in Europe need to come to terms with, that we do not have to like it, but we need to face it. So this is my maybe long-winded answer, Shada. It's yes to reshoring, but careful on currency and the trade-off between people or goods into Europe, and look at the East, China, less India, but also Korea and Japan. They also need to reboost their own economies.
Thank you very much, Michele. Some very, very important points, pragmatic points that you've made. I'm just going to follow up very quickly because you are in Shanghai and you have spoken about how China has, in a sense, recovered, and with the 3% growth rate that you pointed to. All of that points to China still, and you've also talked about competition with Africa and Vietnam and the Cambodias of this world. Absolutely important to point that. But do you see an appetite? And you know, China is now very much focused on boosting internal demand and consumption. But do you see still in China an appetite for going out and investing, for instance, not just through BRI projects, Belt and Road Initiative projects, but more generally in manufacturing? Do you still see a window of opportunity for Southeast Europe to benefit from Chinese FDI?
Yes, if I may, very practical, very non-politician-like. China needs countries that open a door into the EU market. They did so with Hungary. That's why we have lots of investment in Budapest, and Hungary is the country in the EU where the ratio of Chinese investment to GDP, greenfield, is the highest amongst all the 28. So China does reshoring, offshoring for two reasons. One, to access a market, two, to bypass tariffs, barriers. So now China is looking at current or future EU partners, and I think your position is best placed because there is a little bit of time gap that would allow China to invest in the region without being perceived as being too cynical about it, which is what may happen in Czech Republic or Hungary, which is clearly to sell things back into Germany. But if something is done in any of the countries of the region, could be seen, and I don't know what the society would perceive this as potential investment, provided it's greenfield. Because that's a challenge. China wants to do M&A, not greenfield. And so we have this imbalance between inbound and outbound. China only does M&A out and only takes greenfield in. And the other reason why China would continue to invest, I said, is to bypass tariff. And this is why much of the production is moving to Vietnam, not just because Vietnam is near or cheap, but because Vietnam has an FTA with the European Union. So a free trade agreement. So all goods made in Vietnam by Chinese companies are not made in EU, but basically with the, except for rice that has a quota, all manufacturing product can go from Vietnam to the EU immediately at almost, a tapering off tariff.
Right.
And so this is what China is looking at. Countries like Georgia, like Switzerland, they have a free trade agreement that could be entry points.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. And of course, you've talked about China, but there's also Japan and Korea and Taiwan that are out there and looking for destinations of investment. Let's move on, and I have some questions coming in. So for Melinda, you have a question which is about the green lanes that you talked about as a good demonstration, a good example of where countries can work together. And the question is, how can that be replicated? And do you think that your organization can help to engineer such replication of this kind of coordination and working together?
I hope you were addressing the question to me, because
yes,
I had some problems with internet, but I just heard the half part of it. So I guess you're asking about the roaming green lanes and all the story.
That's right. So the question is, how can this green lanes example be replicated? Yeah.
Now let's some few points that I was throwing down while Michele was talking. First, before I forget on the China possibility to invest in the region. Well, the level of investments in China in the region, actually the total share that they have in all the Western Balkans, stay at the level of 5.5% of the overall regional trade. Only EU FDIs in only 7 years stand at 72%. And on the overall total stock, China is standing at the 3%. Now, I'm not an economist, but I would say that this part of economics and the discussions we are having all these months, as we are fully aware, are highly influenced by some disinformation as well. As I mentioned, the EU is the biggest investor in the region. I'm not saying it only because I'm a pro-European and working as well in this process of regional cooperation and European integration. But these are the real facts in the region. So what can be done? The level of I would say, of the FDIs in the Western Balkans has always been kind of has shown this vulnerability because it has never been really strong or quite big. What we had or we received during 2020 when the pandemic started. First, we had the first amount of, let's say, support from the EU side of 3.3 billion euros. Then we are having a new economic and investment package that has to be launched now for the very first week of October. Again, the multi-financial framework, which is the IPA, the grants investment given to the region now for 7 years as well, will go to 14.5 billion. Now, is this going to be enough to really reboost the region even after the pandemic? No, I know that it's not going to be enough. And especially, as we said, there is a slowdown in all sectors, industry, tourism, health, education, and so on. But what can we do? First, I should say what we are doing, and this is what we are coordinating, is trying to bring the region even closer, because the level of consciousness on the necessity of regional cooperation and economic integration, a closer one, is getting higher. Countries, we all know, that cooperate if they perceive that this is to their best interest economically and politically. But all of the economies in the Western Balkans are conscious enough that we are more interdependent on each other than before. Nenad was mentioning our advocacy and diplomacy during the pandemic. Why that story of green lanes was successful? Because we got together, all the countries from Western Balkan 6, plus NIR and the EU Commission, plus all the regional organizations, so RCC, CEFTA, CIF, Transport, Community, all of us together. And we decided, even member states, and we decided just to push a bit for having this system of flow of goods in the region open. It worked out because at that moment of the pandemic, I saw less political rhetorics being alive and kept alive than what we keep hearing day after day. I wouldn't really go into the details, but one of the problematic border crossing points that stands in between two economies in the region that are in the process of dialogue was the one that we are having problems at the beginning, but the very one where problems have been resolved due to our phone calls and being online with each other. So I have to say that because everybody decided to work together, that story of green lanes happened to be a successful one.
Right.
So we had less than 2,000 trucks per day, long queues, PCR test tasks for drivers. Now there are 13,000 trucks per day. The roaming that you mentioned. What is the most important thing now is that in this new package of the common market that we are introducing, coordinating, working, that has to be endorsed during the Sofia summit. Not only the roaming agenda, but the roadmap as well between the Western Balkans and the EU should start on reducing the prices and keeping the roaming proposal free of charge alive. On these new proposals of the common market that has to be endorsed during Sofia summit. We will have for the very first time, I hope it will be endorsed as it is still a draft, the four freedoms that still are a solid part of EU single market, proposed as part of the so-called mini Schengen initiative, to run under one umbrella of the second phase of the regional economic area, or as we are calling it lately, our common market. Okay. Again, this comes as a matter of necessity. So I think that these are good stories that can really not only make a huge change, because the world, as we said, it is in a impasse and slowdown, but it will help the region to consider itself as one common market. Then additional steps will be needed, surely, on the FDIs. As I said, I'm not an economist myself, but the FDIs in the region should be ensured to serve the economic development. The areas that we feel on the digital, on innovation, on agriculture as well, on this system of green lanes that we mentioned, that is one of the takeaways that might be the easiest one.
Right.
Again, a legal framework, a better one, will always help the investors in the region. So the clarity, and that's why we're working on one investment framework for the whole region.
For the region. Right.
These can make the region more attractive and even more solid to face the challenges.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Melinda. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think we need to keep moving on. But you made some very strong points, and the question that has come in, and in a sense, I won't ask it, but it is obvious to us listening to you that sometimes it needs a disaster or a pandemic to actually make sure that people put aside their differences, their rhetoric, as you said, and actually start working on practical issues of, if I could say, survival, really, in the end, economic, but also pure human survival. Ninant, from your point of view, listening to this conversation about FDIs and global supply chains and how the Western Balkans could be made part of, there is a lot of talk, for instance, in Brussels about deglobalization, reshoring, industrial champions, having a European industrial policy. These are kinds of concepts where being a close neighbor with the intention and really moves towards accession, you could benefit from these concepts and these strategies that are being developed.
Oh, well, definitely we can, and everybody can benefit from these strategies. But one thing is also very important, that if anyone should benefit, anyone or everyone should also be part of drafting it, or at least giving its opinion on how it is devised. Unfortunate fact of the Western Balkan 6 that they are out of the EU, and they are not at the table when these big things are being decided. And we had also some kind of misunderstandings when the export of the medical equipment was the case in March, and it was a kind of a big upheaval it caused among the regional countries, that like saying, okay, no, we are not a member of the EU, but still, why are we excluded from this system, and we are fairly small as a number of size of population. So I think that also this disruption that we are living in, caused by pandemics, but also I would say by other also global developments, political ones, maybe should be some kind of a driving force to see the Balkans in the long-term planning of the EU as its future full-fledged members, therefore to be part of the looking for the solution, not as to being the one that will just kind of to be delivered the solution, especially bearing in mind the fact that I would say, even though we shouldn't discard Far East and we shouldn't just look over Japan, South Korea, all this Southeast Europe and China, but definitely many industries after this experience with COVID and in the future also that we are still in a kind of pandemic mode, we look for some solutions that are geographically near and geographically closer, and wouldn't need to be so much complicated and different to organize the investment. So I think that Western Balkans is and should be that part of the world to be part of this type of relocation strategies if there's going to be one. Also, what is for us, I think here is important also to work as much as possible. That was from the beginning our aim to try to make regional big companies that can compete on the European market. And unfortunately, many of the obstacles that are created because our markets and our regulations and our standards are in many ways fragmented, cause of the dissolution of Yugoslavia, but also being then 20 years of the new system, and plus with Albania, who was never part of the system, and so we have really discrepancies in many of the standards and of the procedures, and that is not good for creating regional leaders who wish to invest in the region and build up their businesses in the region with the aim to also make one step towards the EU. In addition to it, political grievances and instability were also hampering this type of development. And we are also, on the other hand, encouraging governments to provide these type of incentives for the local big companies who are working in the region already to be more present, to make joint ventures with the local companies or the similar type, and to build the value chain. And in addition to it, these companies will be more attractive for the investments than from the EU, but also from the US and from other countries. The investors will look for the successful stories. And success stories is not if the company is just serving, let's say, I don't know, 2 million people, or even like Serbia, 7 million people. On this global scale, this is really nothing. It's size of some bigger town, maybe, or not a bigger town in Far East. Let's say, I mean, it's a size of a town in Far East. So I think these things to look global and to see for the region, and to see how to overcome years of fragmentation, both political and then also economic, and but especially in the area of legal framework, that those should be the task of all of us to support it, but of the politicians to enable that.
Okay, can I just ask you, Ninan, so from your point of view, all that you've said is very relevant and obviously makes a lot of sense. But what are you doing in your organization to ensure, to facilitate this kind of convergence and working together? Because you're absolutely right. And, Michele said it, the world is a big place. There are lots of rivals there, lots of competition happening. This region has many advantages, including a young, youthful workforce, great women workers as well. We have to say that. But we also see a lot of, as you said, political grievances which come to mar the landscape. So an organization such as yours, what are you doing in practical terms?
Well, I mean, concretely, organization that is called, or forum, Western Balkans Investment Forum, is an organization of 6 chambers of the Western Balkans, created kind of for the margin of the Berlin process, with the very idea to facilitate all this, to bring companies together, especially big companies who were already present in the region, but to enable them to be heard and to be their voice towards the governments, towards the international organizations, towards the EU, towards all interested parties that can help or that can be interested to invest or to business here. To make a step ahead, we demonstrated, for instance, concretely, and that was the idea of the Chamber of Commerce of Serbia and Kosovo, without any kind of big delegations from Brussels, big delegations from Washington, to create an institution called the Secretariat, basically to structure this Western Balkan Investment Forum, and to, based on the collaboration with our two chambers, basically Kosovo and Serbia, to show that collaboration is possible and cooperation is possible. And regionally here there are many, but political grievances. One of the biggest one is the issue between Serbia and Kosovo, Belgrade Pristina dialogue. That is somehow whose normalization will also positively or negatively influence the dynamics in the region. And we show that here we met, we organized, we worked together, we approached our governments with concrete measures, and we also were kind of bringing companies from Kosovo to Serbia, from Serbia to Kosovo, and then in the wider region, showing that there is an interest. But then we also saw many problems. Company from Serbia in the dairy industry wanted to invest in Kosovo to have a joint company to then export region-wise. They couldn't because the certificate on milk and dairy has not been harmonized between Serbia and Kosovo, and they cannot, they cannot sell cheese and milk products between Serbia and Kosovo. So something like that, which looks kind of ridiculous, obstacling this concrete activity. So I want to say we are trying our best. We are working in the realm of companies, governments, international organizations, together with RCC, to basically to show that solutions are possible.
Yeah, I have a.
We're not talking about, sorry to say, rocket science. There is a solution within the region, and it's there. But it's painstaking, and it takes time and political commitment to implement it.
Right. Just before I go to Michele, because I have a question for him too, but I have a very quick question coming in from our listeners and online viewers, and that is that what do you think, or do you know, Nenant, what Mr. Boyer is going to announce at the upcoming press briefing? Now, this is obviously got to do with the United States and the meeting that's taking place in terms of investments, etc., in the Western Balkans.
The meeting took place last week.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, well, you probably followed the kind of pretty big delegation from Washington.
That's right, yeah.
With the DFC, but also with the Exim Bank and USAID and other institutions, Secretary of Energy, to support the Washington agreements on normalization between Serbia and Kosovo. We were working with the DFC since February. I said, as a chambers,
to the Development Finance Corporation.
Yes. To explain them how it is important for them to physically be present in the region. Right. And we are really happy that we managed to agree with them to open an office in Belgrade that will cover all the region. And I also am aware of the projects that governments are presenting, and they are from infrastructure and energy ones to concrete projects by companies.
Okay.
But as now in this conference mode, we can say the floor is theirs. Yeah. So we are expecting very soon. The opening of the office in terms of their physical presence, because now that's the procedure is ongoing. And to basically present to the public what are the concrete projects, measures, products that they can offer. They are a development bank, so they are providing loans.
Okay.
But with their loans, there is a number of private financial institutions from the US that are coming. And there is, with their loans, there is also a possibility to have US technology being used and being present here.
Okay.
And with their way of work, there is a number of standards that projects need to fulfill, from environmental one, protection workers,
Okay.
so on and so forth, which I think it's a good example. And if we have this example set in stone, then I would say that also partners from Far East, from China, probably would also need to accommodate to such a standards. But that also depends also of the local legislation and local governments. I mean, like, you know,
absolutely,
it's a kind of exchange.
Absolutely.
But, we are definitely, how to say, looking forward to their presence here, and to if part of it which we discussed is implemented, it will be visible.
It's good news. It's good news. So, Michele, thank you very much, Anand. So, Michele, to sort of come back to some of the issues that Majlinda and Anand have talked about, and basically it is about the need to work together to become a more attractive destination for investments. To what extent, I mean, you, as I said, Italy is a big investor, the European Union is as well. What do you see as the assets, let's say the positive, the constructive side of Western Balkans, the proximity to the EU markets? You've said that's important for China, but how important is it to get over these roadblocks, these political roadblocks? And what can the European Union, what can Italy do to get this moving again? Can we use, as Majlinda has said, this crisis as an opportunity to get people working together? Practical side of things.
I'm very honest. The opportunity arose in February this year, 8 months ago. And again, it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that for reasons that I've been trying even to mitigate and change in the European Union way of working, we need to act faster. So you're right, we have opportunities, but we've been talking too much and done very little. And this is everyone's fault, because everyone, how to say, you get swung by the urgency of other problems, and policymakers lose focus. So the opportunity, I'm afraid, is slipping away from us, because you know what's going to happen now. We are, the paradox is, if the crisis gets solved in the next few months, that we hope, then the need to grab the opportunity from the crisis will dissipate, will dissolve, because people will say, oh, there's no crisis anymore. Things start rebounding. People already talking about V-shape. We have a recovery fund that taps into some of resources. And so there is, I fear, there is already a positive mood in government people in Europe that do believe that this is past. And that would be then a missed opportunity. I tell you something that you know well, better than I. I think that the European Union is looking into the region is, I generally say, reforms of the legal system, the doing business, the activities, the legal framework, the implementation of the rule of law, and things that, you know, these are like nothing special, just part of the agenda of the EU that we do even have within our member states. So this would be the way to create the opportunity for further investment. The other thing that I would suggest to create opportunity is we have a special economic zones in Italy, in the southern part of Italy, that I don't think they work very well. They don't work because they're aimed at tax shield. So the only incentive is tax shield, which is you know, nice if you already make money and the tax is below the profit line, unless there is VAT and other taxes that are at the top line, for which there could be gains. But basically doing tax advantages, tax shield, it does not work. What I suggest is to create some special economic zones that are maybe restricted in an area that completely work under a new efficient legal juridical system. Labor law, rule of law are maybe one can use the, I don't know, the Anglo-Saxon method of free liberal hiring and firing, if one wishes so, but at least restricted to an area to see if they work, because otherwise we are in a loop where we have policies to support unemployment, furlongs, universal basic income, the government invested to put a hole in the industries that don't work, like tourism, 20% to GDP in the region, 15% in Italy, so we are on the same boat on that. But then it doesn't do anything for the future because people get used to receiving money. So I think the solution, I don't know, it's an idea. It's a creation of a small special economic zones that work in a different world from legal and labor law and so on than the rest of the country. If it works, it then gets expanded.
Michele, this is fascinating what you've just said. Very, very, very fascinating. I don't know what Melinda and Nanan think of it, but I think it's extremely interesting what you've said. Obviously being inspired a little bit by where you are, because this is the kind of pilot project. All right, but can I ask you?
But you see, Shada, when you see 10% GDP growth for 40 years, you kind of suspect that they must have done something right. So we go scouting for what those could be. I compare it with the the SEZ that we have in Italy and even in Sicily, where I come from, and they just don't take off.
So the one question that I have in my mind, and I've just got it from one of our viewers, is really, let's be visionary and think about these pilot projects, if I might call that, these special economic zones that you've talked about. Can we not do them on a regional kind of for once have a kind of a regional project test cross-border?
Too big. The dynamics of having thousands or millions of people involved, people who are not ready, is tricky also because, if you do it for the whole country or for the whole region, it almost becomes a obligation for everyone to be part of.
But what about Italy and Albania? Supposing we were to do it between Italy and Albania?
No, we can do like, Tirana and, 50 times 50 kilometers, and the same in Italy, in Puglia or Sicily. You know why? It's not just the issue of the size, is that if we restrict it to a geographic area that is smaller than the country, then we make it voluntary because people can stay in or out.
Of course.
But if we make it to the whole country, then we force people to play the game. And that creates disharmonies and so on. But we make it voluntary, and by making it voluntary, we need to then have it on a subset of the geography of the country. That could be an interesting thing to do, even twins, and see how the 2 or 3 or 6 or 7 countries can learn from each other.
That's what I meant. Even if we could, I'm now being really visionary, we could even make it sectorial. But so no, there's an idea. That has come up. But Michele, thank you for that. I'm going to go back to the panel. I have about 7 minutes left. Do you want to, Melinda, come in? I'll give you 3 minutes, 3 minutes to Nanan, and then a minute to you, Michele, because you've just spoken as well. But think of your final wrap-up points that you want to make at this stage, because we've had a very interesting, but quite a, let's say, large and far-reaching discussion. Just let's now zoom in on 1 or 2 things that you think, Melinda, going forward, I'll say 3 things, are absolutely essential if we're going to come out of this building back better, because that's what we're all trying to do now. Come back better.
Come back better, I think better resilience for all of us. Then continuing with the reforms that each country in the region has already introduced, even in terms of the recovery package, and trying to use every single opportunity to keep this region as a market. So you know that EU arose from war through the community of steel and coal. And I think it's for us as well of utmost importance to keep this process of regional economic integration, and vis-a-vis to European integration alive and as well moving on. So not to leave the Western Balkans aside. It means that we have to be part, as I said, of the EU value chains. And for that, we need to keep always an open line for in terms of trade, and as we mentioned as well, FDIs and so on. On the special economic zones, I would refrain myself to comment, because anytime in the Balkans that anybody hears about something special or zone, discussions, you know, get heated. So I don't think that this might be the good story, at least for the moment. But yes, the agendas that bring the economies closer together aim to build up an area where the development will be less hurdle than less restraints than previously.
Thank you very much, Majlinda. Thank you very much indeed. Nenan, please.
Well, on the zones, I mean, one can also think of the that is a similar kind of intellectual thought, and it was attempted before to be shaped, which is basically cross-border cooperation via micro-regions. And that's something which you can work as basically as a triangles that are not big, as Michele said, because they shouldn't be big, otherwise then you change all the legislation and country structure. But it should be something which is kind of fairly small. But if you see this, how to say, triangles or cross-border areas that are, say, similar in geography, have a similar workforce, have certain advantages that are shared or divided by the border, and organize them within a micro-region that is existing in Europe with its own small institutions that are managing either special economic zone or managing environmental protection, then you can think of along those lines. For instance, I will use the very recent example that is in the Washington Agreement, which is like and everybody was puzzled why it's there. It is this feasibility study on Lake Gazivode, or Uiman, as the Kosovo Albanians would like to call it. We thought in the Chamber of Commerce that, like, let's see what is there any project that can bring two sides together, and this could be the one, for instance, because this lake goes both in Serbia and in Kosovo, it's in both sides. The river goes through Montenegro, Serbia, and Kosovo. If you see this riverbed and the hydropower plant and the whole area, which is currently unprotected, beautiful environment, forestry, all this is and the river is pretty polluted. I think from the heavy metals, from traps and so on and so forth. All these points are there that you can have a multi-region project of reviving of the modernization of hydropower plant, reviving of the area in the purpose of tourism, employing green, environmentally friendly technology to clean the riverbed that goes and pollutes also Serbia, and the project that will basically attract population in Montenegro, in Serbia, and in Kosovo. And this is a type of a zone. And we said, okay, can we have some feasibility study to show that this can be done? Not like, you know, this, when there is a border between, you can put a wall between the border, or you can put, I don't know, like you can just annul it, and you can have the collaboration. Depends what the political will wants.
Exactly.
We would like to basically show that through this project, there could be cooperation.
It can be done.
Just on the bigger scale, I think that we should think, what is our steel and coal agreement? What is it for the region? What is there to bring this region together? Is it? I would advocate for energy. I would advocate for something which is, can we collaborate on energy production and distribution? Renewable as much as possible to some, of course, but I mean, when you have a country that is like a landlocked and doesn't have, like, I don't know, much of the potential for renewable, it's better to collaborate with the other countries that has this potential, and then to see how to jointly manage the system.
Right.
And because tying our countries around something which is tangible, and which is necessary as energy, which is also very not problematic, but it entails a lot of joint management, will show there is a commitment of all the to pursue such a project.
Right.
And this
Nina,
is for everyone, and it could be part of the Green New Deal of the European Union.
I think that's excellent idea also. And I think, Ardian, for the next time we have a conference, I think this is what is our steel and coal moment. I think is a good entry path into this conversation. We have a minute left before I have to wrap up. Michele, I'd like your final word. You started a visionary conversation, so perhaps you can end on that kind of note as well, looking ahead.
I think one word, education. Spend on young education. We have the duty and also the economic and the social reasons for investing in education, because this is the basis of a competitiveness of a country. Spend research on GDP. We are below. European Union is below that of Asian partners. This is the thing that I will emphasize, both as a professor, that's my normal job, and as a way to push the economy. It's a really no-brainer, but it needs to also be well spent. It's not just the money that counts. We talk always about budgets without thinking about what to do with it. We need to reverse the logic, find ideas, and then go look for the money. I used to do another job. I was in corporate finance, in investment banking. So I know that when there are good ideas, the money follows the ideas. So we don't need to chase the money. We need to chase the good ideas.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very wise note to end on. So thank you very much, Nina and Michele and Majlinda. We've had a fascinating conversation, a very necessary conversation. We've talked about practical things and how to change the current situation to make it a better one, optimistic one. But we've also, thanks to you, the panel, brought in some forward-looking and I would say even out-of-the-box ideas about how we can actually get some of the work we need to do. As you were talking, I was thinking about, I'm a journalist and analyst at heart, and I was thinking of about 4 or 5 R things that come up. So obviously we've talked about crisis being an opportunity, and we've talked about a recovery, and we've talked about reform, R for reform, R for resilience, very necessary. And I think, to be quite frank, our societies, our people, young people, old people, women, children, have shown resilience during this pandemic. I have to say, across the globe, actually, we've shown how people can actually find the strength to adapt and change the way they're operating. I hope that we can continue on that path, and that some of the good changes, and many good changes have been made in the Western Balkans, but across the world, will remain with us. We've talked about reconciliation and obviously the most important thing, regional integration. So crisis as an opportunity. We've seen that when things get tough, the tough get going, we can get together and work together. And so I would say it was a very, very interesting conversation. I love the idea of a steel and coal moment. I love the idea of pilot projects. I love the idea of green lanes. And that's the way I think we can work together. So I would like to thank my 3 panelists for this wonderful conversation. To all of you watching, this panel closes the first day of this fascinating and very interesting conference. Next session is tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and that will be the second day of this conference. So we're looking forward to welcoming all of you again. And in the meanwhile, have a lovely evening. Stay safe and stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.